everybody. Welcome, Pine Island Research. It is Monday night once again. Glad you guys chose to spend some time with us. I think we've got an interesting show lined up for tonight. Just to let you know right off the bat, one of the members of our panel, my friend Steve Kulls, started some pretty intense physical therapy today on his neck. And anybody who's ever had some form of intense physical therapy, it kicks your butt pretty good. And he's not feeling it on his game. And my number one hope for him is that he starts feeling better. So he will not be joining us tonight, but we will get him on at some other point here soon. But I have Thomas Steenburg. I've got Eric Palacios from Media Palace, and I've got Joe Snyder. There he is. How are you guys doing?
Good, doing good.
Pretty cool.
Thomas, you have a good Easter out there on the West Coast?
Well, it's been raining cats and dogs here for a little while, and I had a close friend who passed away just recently, and we're dealing with that.
Oh, no.
This Friday, and it's been hectic. I spent today at the museum in Harrison talking to an Australian rugby team about the history of Sasquatch in the area. Those are tough lads.
I'll tell you what, crossing, exploring new ground. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I used to play rugby when I was younger, and I can tell you, if that's a sport you choose to partake in, your career probably won't be very long. It is one of the roughest things I've ever tried in my life. But and Joe, how was your weekend? Pretty good?
Well, working.
Yeah, I suppose you get a lot of, especially on Saturday, you get all those people who have family and from out of town. They want to.
Well, Saturday
they don't care to do the cooking.
Yeah, it wasn't. Sunday was a day that I thought it might be busy in the morning. You know, people waking up, grabbing some early breakfast from McDonald's or Tim Hortons or something like that before they're off to church, and then thought that lunchtime wasn't going to be much, but and so it wasn't. It wasn't as busy in the morning as I thought. Sunday was, but other than that, I mean, I know my weekend's been okay.
Awesome. How about you, Eric?
It's crazy weather, kind of like Thomas. We've had, tornado watches, tornado warnings, and we got hit last year with the tornadoes. So
yeah,
got to pay attention to those.
There's been a lot of really unseasonable weather patterns that are just, starting early this year and starting pretty at a pretty high level. That's for sure. It's amazing how, we get a lot of tornadoes in this area too, but, most of these areas, the tornado gets close to town or brushes the edge of town. I can't believe how many of these storm fronts have actually just leveled really fairly large areas of some of these towns and cities that they've affected.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we're still dealing with it.
Well, down in Texas here, from you straight up to me is that middle of the country. It seems to be Texas, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Kansas, the Dakotas. I mean, it's like it's just so crazy that so many times when we have tornadoes, it's pretty flat ground. I mean, you can see them coming from a ways away sometimes, and it's pretty scary. Especially if you're driving or something, you don't have any place to gain some cover. But well, I'm excited about tonight's topic. That we've brushed on it a few times in the past. Me and Joe had a conversation about it last weekend a little bit, and most of our conversation really focused on the tendency that we see sometimes in this community of people kind of, I don't know if it's done blatantly out of ignorance or if it's or out of deception, or if it's just maybe somebody misrepresenting it and kind of falling into the rhetoric of using some of the words, but taking data to be considered, whether that's an audio recording you've got, a picture you've got, an encounter story you've got, whatever you want to share, you know, it's data to be considered. There's going to be people that will look at it and say, I believe it's authentic, and other people who won't. And that should be expected before you share it, really. But so many times we're seeing stuff, you know, somebody will share an audio recording and say, this is proof that Bigfoot exists. You know, we see that all the time. And that in itself has been a conversation forever. I mean, Thomas can testify to that. Ever since Patterson and Gimlin dismounted those horses, that has been a conversation to be had. But now we're looking at some of this advancement that's taking place with tools like AI. The AI is pretty well established with photograph capability. Anybody can download on their smartphone an AI program. And, you know, for $4 or $5, you take 50 pictures of yourself or upload 50 pictures of your face. And then you can tell it, make a picture of me standing next to a train in the 1880s and give it 30, 45 seconds and it'll do it. And it looks pretty convincing. But yeah, now
look at it and say, Jeff, I didn't know you were at Gettysburg.
Yeah. You know, you can put yourself anywhere in history, really, with these. It's a novelty. I mean, it's interesting. But as this technology is advancing at such a liquid, fast, lightning pace, the video capability of it and the ability to write artificial metadata to accompany those videos has gotten to an extent to where we aren't years away from it. We're probably only months away to where if I was to fly a drone and video 2 Sasquatch walking through a tree line and it was authentic video, you could recreate exactly what I've done with AI and write the metadata so that somebody who's looking at these 2 videos, who's skilled, knows what they're doing, may not be able to tell the difference in. And the big question is where does that leave us moving forward in Sasquatch research? What is it going to be easy to consider some of these things as valid, or is there going to be a natural resistance to that? And Thomas, you know, you've been looking at this stuff longer than probably me and Joe and Eric put together as far as your experience goes. So I'm glad you're able to join us tonight. But tell us a little bit about the challenges that existed, you know, when Patterson and Gimlin shot their film, and from then until now. I mean, there's always been kind of a challenge with this, hasn't there?
Always. It's always been the same, and it's really no different now, even with this AI and all this modern technology and this wonderful thing called the internet that we're able to talk to each other like never before. I mean, it wasn't that long ago I considered all this Star Trek. Mm-hmm. You know? But it's always been the same. And so it has to come down to what constitutes proof and what constitutes, you know, soft evidence, circumstantial evidence. And I'm afraid we have to stick to what was originally said. Hard evidence is the creature itself, a body or piece of the body or skeletal remains. Everything else has to be questioned, has to be analyzed, and it has to be looked at with a really solid grain of salt.
Yeah, no,
everything these days. I mean, there are people who have put fake, and we've seen them all on YouTube and stuff. There are some pretty fantastic special effects videos done out there, and they've done a pretty good job. And they've got a lot of people believing it's real. The first giveaway is saying, boy, this guy's lucky. He's encountered Bigfoot 8 times and filmed it 5.
Yeah, right.
You know, whereas me,
I've been buying a lottery ticket at that point.
Since 1978, and I may have had a fleeting glimpse once. You know? So that puts red flags to me. But then again, I've always been stick to the facts, never deviate from the facts. And to me, evidence has to be looked at hard with a common sense mind, not closed-mindedness, but they have to be questioned. And the first thing you do if someone comes out with a video or picture like this, like what you're talking about today, is, I'm sorry, they're going to get offended. You know, when you question them, they shouldn't, because it's an investigation. We're trying to determine whether or not we have a species of creature in the wilderness areas of North America. And you come out with this video claiming that it's it, we're going to have to look at it very hard and very intently. Hell, we looked at Roger's film the same way. We've been trying to disprove it for over 50 years. You know?
Yeah, no, I agree.
And anything that comes out today is not going to be accepted. Well, it's going to be accepted by some people, because there are some people out there who just want to believe anything.
Well, yeah, I think that there are people out there who cautious optimism is like they're 10 stages past that somehow.
Right.
I mean, but you're right. I mean, Patterson Gimlin, I use this analogy a lot. They left the football on the 5-yard line, and it hasn't moved much since then. And yet we have thousands upon thousands of encounters shared. We have a lot of video that's been shared that some of it I find intriguing. I mean, it's hard for me to look at and say that is in fact real or it isn't. Okay. Some of it just I have to classify as really intriguing. Some of it pretty easy to discredit and say this is why that's not real. There are, like you say, I mean, there's red flags that come up in probably not so much just in the video, but in the backstory. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people who analyze this stuff, like Steve and even Doug. You know, they'll say, I'm intrigued by the video, but a lot of times my ability to find the flaws will lay in the backstory and the inconsistencies that surface and the inability to explain something. Or, you know, if you shot a video that you present as being legit video, and somebody like yourself, Thomas, comes to me and says, let's go out to where you shot that and let's reshoot it and get some, you know, references to size and things like this. If I was to not be open to that idea, I don't know that a bigger red flag would pop up than that, you know?
Oh, yeah.
But, you know, you've looked at, you've shared often the story about how you were investigating, and I'm horrible with names, Thomas, please forgive me, but you know, you looked at pictures and you went out to that location and you guys got reference and in the end was able to come to a conclusion. Your boots on the ground ability and track record of putting yourself in these places and looking at them, not just at a video and drawing a conclusion, you know, or a picture. You've been out there and done that before. You understand the work and the that it takes to really dissect something like that.
Oh, absolutely. There's a couple of cases I looked into where the witness who shot the video really believed they caught something.
Yeah.
You know, and then we found out the name of the guy they actually filmed.
Yeah.
They said, oh, that was me they filmed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was out there gathering firewood or something in that area.
Hoover Lake. Yeah. North of Mission here a few years ago. Thinker Thunker still thinks it's real, or at least he does in the video point today. But I know the name of the guy who was in the footage. His name is Brandon Pola.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's damn sure. He said if they just kept filming, they would have seen me get back in my canoe and row across the lake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, the interesting thing about that event is that the person who thought they had filmed something, like you said, they thought they filmed something real. They thought they had captured a picture that was
possibly. I always wondered why they stopped filming when they did.
Yeah.
And, you know, maybe they did see him get in this canoe and roll across the lake. You know, you never know
what happened.
The problem is with this video, it wasn't the photographer who originally released it. He handed it to a group called here that never took off called Legend Tracker. They were trying to sell a new cell phone program for listing cryptozoological locations on maps.
Yeah.
Right. And they released it saying, oh, it was handed to us anonymously. We don't know, they blah, blah, blah. It was the same group that released the film where you see a whole bunch of Asian tourists taking all these pictures with cameras, taking pictures of a Sasquatch off the side of the road, behaving like a nonchalant black bear in Yellowstone Park. You know, oh, how do these people get that early? So I was convinced that they were pushing hoaxing, and they didn't even release the name of the lake. I found that out because I found it. And the only way to get in, you have to hike in because the road is now blocked off with a gate. You have to hike in a couple of kilometers to get to this spot. And that's what they were doing. They were looking down the lake from high up on the road. And they saw this man who's over 6 feet tall, was wearing dark hoodie, black pants, and he had a small backpack on, and he was in that outcropping. It looks like an island in the video, but it's actually just a sliver of land sticking out in the lake. And he was looking for firewood. That's what he was doing. And he was convinced it was him that they filmed. And I think he's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But, you know, like you say, this is probably an instance where, you know, we can't prove that it was hoaxed. No. It could, a plausible explanation here is that somebody just didn't realize that they hadn't filmed what they thought it might be. And there wasn't any premeditated deception or plan to profit involved in this. It doesn't appear. And I think that's a big determining factor when I look at, you know, people who are simply speaking out, you know, drawing conclusions that maybe we aren't capable to draw based on the data they're presenting. Or is it somebody who's manufactured something with the intent to deceive, you know?
All right. Like another instance is recently, 2013, a couple near Port Renfrew in Vancouver Island went hiking on a hiking trail, and they encountered something that they really didn't get a good look at. It was just, and they kept their distance from because they thought it might be a bear, and they videotaped it, right? It's known as the Port Renfrew footage. You can see it on YouTube. Taken in 2013. The couple didn't say anything about it because they lost the card from the camera. And they didn't say anything about it for a couple of years. Well, then they found the card and they looked at it. And they said, geez, do you think this could be? And they didn't come out and say they filmed a Sasquatch. They were asking us what they might have filmed. And you do see something very hairy and shaggy in the trees. The problem is it's obscured by the trees and you don't really get a good look at it. So if it wasn't a Sasquatch, it was obviously a large bear leaning against the trees or a rock face in amongst those trees for some reason. And they just filmed this thing. And it's known as the Port Renfrew footage. Still fascinates me as to its possibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Joe, what are your thoughts on some of these challenges that we're likely to start facing when looking at video that people share?
Well, look, I'm not well versed in this AI stuff. I mean, I know that I understand the capabilities of it, etc. I'm not even going to begin to tell you how you make it work, but it does. People much smarter than me that developed it. And yeah, when it comes to this particular subject or anything dealing with something that's not proven, that people say actually is real, aka UFOs, ghosts, Bigfoot, whatever.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah, it's you know, look, this started out, you know, long ago. I mean, Thomas is a guy here that's been interested in this since about the same time I was, you know, 1978. Now, I'm not in any league with Thomas Steenburg or many of the people I associate with. I touched on that in my show. I'm a searcher, man. I'm not in the league with these guys, but it started out with just some simple guys, and I don't mean simple as simple men that were trying to figure out if something was real. And now it's exploded into this circus that it's Bigfoot is pop culture. And it started out with some guys wanting some answers, some real answers to a mystery, to find out whether there was really anything to it, to now there's so much hoaxing going on because it's big business with Bigfoot. You use them in advertising and everything else. And the AI stuff, yeah, you might as well throw out any kind of video evidence. Now, that's not to say that I still think that experts in analysis, me, you're right. Somebody can put some AI stuff up there, and to me, it looks real. I have no way of telling that it's not real. Now, yeah, there's still going to be some expert that's going to be like, nope, that's AI. But it's, yeah, I mean, for me, myself, and where I've been going now with this, video's not going to make a difference to me. I mean, I'm going to, be skeptical of every video now, from now on, especially the more this AI comes out, right? Am I still going to try on my cheap little cameras to film anything that ever happens to me?
Sure.
Should it ever happen again? Nah, I'm still going to do that, but I'm not going to have any illusions to that it's going to be evidence for anybody except for myself. Just like you mentioned, Jeff, my encounter. It's just evidence to me. It may be data to somebody else if they believe me, but that's all it is. And, this is going to keep continuing the way it's been going. You're going to have a small percentage, I think, in my opinion, you're going to have a small percentage of people that are really interested in the scientific approach and the research and investigation of this. And then you're going to have this huge section that all they really care about is the distraction of Bigfoot and something fun. And they're willing to pay for that. And, and I'm not saying that the people that are trying to, that do want the reality and the truth of it, I'm not saying they should stop pointing out when people are, just like, that's not real, guys, okay? I'm not saying they should stop doing that. But I'm just saying that it's going to continue until one thing and one thing only happens. And that is that this species is proven to be real to everybody in the entire world.
Yeah.
That's when all people stop, man. But
I used to get so frustrated when I would watch some of these shows, on the different channels that covered, it's not just Bigfoot, all the paranormal type documentaries and shows and series. I feel like nobody can really represent a serious approach on there without the network itself probably wanting to some degree Hollywoodize it, How many times has somebody stood on a trail and they knock and they're listening, and what I'm hearing is the guy watching my TV is the haunting background music. It's like, dude, I want to hear the dead silence that they're hearing right now, okay? I don't want to hear the music play.
Yeah, and that Blair Witch Project genre, sticking the camera in your face and run through the trees looking scared,
Mm-hmm.
It's reached epidemic proportions.
Yeah.
It's
I've often said that I feel that one of the big disservices done to this community, and I say this understanding, first of all, that everybody's on their own journey in this. Anybody who's looking for an answer to this mystery, who hasn't had an encounter and seen it for themselves, and is trying to answer this, what they're searching for, where they're at in that journey. Some people just started it this morning. Some people have been doing it for 50 years, right? Everybody's at a different spot. And when somebody comes on, whether they're an influencer, whether they're a podcast host, whether they're a researcher, whatever position or moniker they hang around their neck, we're operating in a subject matter here that has very, very little facts. But yet how much stuff is being presented factually, not as a hypothesis, not as a plausible option to consider, not as data to say yes or no to, but stated, saying, I jokingly said this morning with Brian King Sharp. somebody says, man, if you ever hear one knock 3 times and it's followed by this, you better run like hell, because this is what's going to, I don't think that's fair. I mean, there are people, maybe people like us would hear that and laugh. There's other people that are taking notes, dude. They don't know.
Oh, someone coming into this today, I feel so sorry for it, because there's just dump trucks loads of stuff dumped on your head.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. The Sasquatch community as a whole thinks is gospel, and so many alleged Sasquatch activities are now passed on as accepted fact. It all took on a life of its own, and in my opinion, never should have.
Yeah.
An example is that is a late friend of mine, Bob Titmus, first proposed in the late 1960s about twisted trees. He was asking a question.
Sure.
Could Sasquatch have anything to do with this? It was never an established fact, but within a few years and by the time the mid-1980s rolled around, every documentary on this subject was saying twisted trees were markers being made by Sasquatch, as though it was accepted fact.
Right.
And they always
get that.
Yeah, there's how do you explain this structure, that structure? There's nobody here. Well, you're there.
Yeah.
What makes you think no one else has ever been there?
No, I mean, I've experienced the same thing when I've been doing a live stream in an area and people are telling me in the chat, knock. And I'm like, well, why would I do that? That hasn't been proven to be one thing or another. That, do a yell. And I'm like, well, we still don't know.
I don't do any of that.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't do any of that.
I don't either.
I've had some conversations with, well, first of all, I've mentioned this morning. I'm part of a network of hunting guides. I guide pheasant hunters out here in South Dakota, but a network of guides that operate big game hunting in northern Idaho, Montana, Saskatchewan. I mean, really, really remote places. Mm-hmm. And I often have gotten a kick out when somebody says, man, we drove up to this place and hiked in 2 miles, and then they start telling you about something. They say, no human's ever been here. It's like, dude, you drove like walking distance from where you're at now. I've been in some of these places, and I have people I've talked to that have been in these places for 8, 10, 12 days, to where they had to ride horses for 3 days just to get to where this place is. And I've actually had conversations with a person who won a season of the show alone. And he's telling me about what it's like to be that isolated for that long in an area. And you start drawing a new definition to what remote looks like. We're not talking about rural. We're not talking about you send up a drone and you fly at 5 miles and there's a convenience store or a stop sign intersection. We're talking about if you simply just cut yourself and you hiked for 10 days, you aren't going to find another human to help. It's just like there are some areas that are really remote. And if you're part of a species that is number one trying to survive, survivability is your number one goal, and that's being elusive, staying away from threats. I think there's probably plenty of them out there in those areas. There's just so much cover that they can retreat into that when they see a human, they know you were there, but you'll never know they were there. I mean, in most cases, it's some of these fringe areas where they're finding themselves, where I think a lot of encounters are, because they don't have that remoteness to disappear into as easily. I use the example of, if you look at the number of encounters that are mapped out in Florida versus Washington, I believe the number of Sasquatch likely to be in the state of Washington is probably 50 to 100 times more than what would be in Florida. But there's more people in Florida. And there's less areas for them to get lost in and hide from you. But you touch on something there when you talk about people saying, well, no humans have been here. I'm the only human around. It's like, dude, there's not a lot of places that are like that in the first parts of our country that were settled along the East Coast and stuff. Doesn't mean there's not dense areas and forests that they likely are in, but well, to be able to assume no human is within 10 miles of me is pretty hard to do anywhere.
Oh, yeah. But on the other hand, Jeff, it's easier to avoid people in wilderness areas today than it was 120 years ago.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because we don't have large populations of mountain men making their living off the land like we did. We don't have whole nations of First Nations traveling from point A to point B like they did in the past.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
If you were in those areas, that's what you had to do to feed yourself or survive, right. Stay out of the elements. You had to be carving the intestinal fortitude it took to survive back then was something. I mean,
sorry about that. My phone rang.
Oh, that's all right.
Yeah. Eric, in British Columbia here, it's they say there's spots here where no one has ever stood. Now, I have no doubt that that's probably true, but I think a more accurate description is if you're standing on that particular shoreline or that particular ridge, you may be the first person to stand in that immediate facility in 15 years, and there may not be another person for another 10.
Yeah.
That's the great advantage to this place. There's not a lot of people here, but there's a lot of land. And that's the biggest argument for the possibility of such a creature like this existing. And if you look at my maps here in my office place here, almost all of them, all the pins and stuff, they're all along areas where there are people to see them. Yet there's vast spots of green there where there's not a single pin. That's not because there's no Sasquatch there. That's because there's no one there to see it, let alone report it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good point. Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's a really good point.
Eric, you've spent a lot of time researching those areas down in Texas. And what an interesting part of your history is, as you've tried to uncover some of the stuff that you've looked at, tried to come up with the right explanation to explain what you're seeing. You've had a lot of interaction with, like law enforcement, press, looking at the archives, recorded records, who owns that property back then,
Sure.
What could that building have been used for, things like that. And do you think that, I'm just curious, first of all, do you think that process has gotten harder now? Online is an easy way to research and find who you should place yourself in front of to ask the question. However, do you think there's more reluctance for you to get an answer than there used to be?
Yeah, I think there is now with the social media part of the game, I guess. I've talked to so many people who don't want their identities to be out there. They don't want to, it's a small community where I am right now. So they, like I said, they don't want their identity out there. They think they're going to be made like a fool, and they feel like they're crazy in a sense almost. Yeah. But they don't realize that I've had at least 25 people with the same story kind of contact me. So, it is a little harder now. Tracking them down has gotten a little bit easier, but it's finding if they're willing to talk or not. It's kind of the harder part.
Well, I've always been intrigued with, law enforcement, people who are government positions, and I don't mean federal government. I mean the town clerk, the people who you're trying to figure out who owned a certain property back then. And, it's almost as if they knew who you were and what you're trying to do, there's this worry that what if I do something wrong? What if I end up in court? What if somebody sues me for giving you information? Yeah. What if it's like, I don't know that some of that worry and accountability existed 50 years ago. You ask a deputy, have you ever seen something like this? He'll answer you before he starts analyzing, could I get fired from my job for saying something? You know what I mean?
No, I have to deal with all of the stuff you said. And then here in Texas, we have a thing that's called a purple post law. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that. Anytime you see a post or a tree that's painted purple, that means, and you cross that fence or that barrier, that means they have a right to shoot you on the spot. No questions asked, no nothing. So maybe you'll get some information. Oh, check this spot out, and you unknowingly cross one of these purple fence posts or a purple tree marker. You're in a lot of trouble there. The cops aren't going to come out to help you. The cops are going to be on the side of the property owner at that time. So, I mean, there's a lot of different factors you have to deal with when you're, researching areas, when you think this might be the person, and it's a lot of different things you got to worry about.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what you were just talking about, Jeff, I just recently was contacted. He's retired now, but he was a police officer in the Olympic Peninsula, Washington State. And he told me during the years of on the job there, he was involved in a Sasquatch incident twice. Once with a partner investigating an intruder just outside a public area. And another one was the very last day on the job when he delivered his last task. He delivered a warrant to somebody he knew in a remote piece of property, and they had the encounter on this person's property. But this police officer told me he learned very quickly there are 3 things you never tell the boss if you encounter it. UFOs, monkeys, or Bigfoot.
Wow. I can see that.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just, one of the things that I uncovered last year, and I'm still working on trying to look into this a little further, this maybe not the beginning of the summer, but later in the summer, was a search and rescue director for a private search and rescue team that services an area of the Boundary Waters. And they had been given assignments to go out and withdraw these people who have issues in the Boundary Waters, which is, 1,100 miles of navigable waterway. There's over 400 or 500 lakes in that one. It's a large area, right? Most of the things that would happen is somebody'd sprain an ankle, or they'd have a bear in their campsite, and even after the bears left, they just psychologically, not everybody's created equal, right? They had the capability for 2 people to canoe 30 miles into an area, but they can't get out now. They just aren't operating well. And a lot of those things were handled by a couple of the different county sheriff's departments that bordered the Minnesota side of the Boundary Waters, and some were handled by Canadian rescue professional organizations. But he was getting assignments from one of the bigger sheriff's departments, and the ones they were getting were ones that almost always involved. We're talking 9 different search and rescue reports, detailed reports that he shared with me. Somebody's got something screaming at them, throwing stuff at them, just freaking out in a campsite. There'll be 3 different canoes with 3 couples there, and they are so out of their mind at that point that they can't get themselves out of that area. And one of the interesting things is that he said, I think they're giving us these extreme calls like this because you can't FOIA request us. We are a private search and rescue organization, and the last thing any sheriff's department would want is press standing on your sheriff's department steps saying, we'd like to talk to Deputy so-and-so. We heard that he talked to somebody who said they saw Sasquatch, or they were, whatever. Anything they thought that had to do with something that didn't have a natural explanation was getting subbed out to the search and rescue team. And I found that really interesting because he's right. That is basically with them, that record's sealed. It is you can't make them show you anything. So, it makes you realize how law enforcement kind of, to some extent, I don't really want to put myself in front of camera and have to talk about the UFO somebody reported that landed on their farm or whatever, right? I don't want to have people look at my deputy and say, your deputy must be crazy if he says he can't figure out what that was, So that's one of the reasons why I was asking that, Eric. I was curious if you feel that it's harder to get comments and information from organizations like that versus maybe than it was 50 years ago, you know?
I think it all comes down to the individuals. Like one of the things that would really impress me would be if I heard that a group of biologists or zoologists who were doing a study that had nothing to do with the Sasquatch, you know, they're doing a grizzly bear study or they're doing a wolverine study or something like that, came across something very interesting out in, you know, like footprints out in their area of study, and they reported it. I've had people like that tell me about sightings of a creature themselves as an individual, but I have yet to hear of a group like that actually coming across, you know, we were up here, 30 miles in on the rainforest studying the white bears, and we came across these human-like tracks, and this is the pictures we took, and you know, that has not happened. And another thing that bothers the hell out of me, if we have a little time here, you like to hear about.
Go ahead.
Have you guys ever heard of Banff National Park?
Oh yeah, I think the lake at Banff is pretty. Most people have seen a picture of it, even if they didn't realize what they were looking at. That aquamarine, beautiful.
We have something. I had an idea about 15 years ago called the Coquihalla Project. Coquihalla Highway was built in 1986 between Merritt and Kamloops. So for years it was a tow highway. They built wildlife fences along the whole length of these highways, and they have, you know, tunnels for wildlife to get through under the highway so they don't get hit by the cars. I had an idea if we could get, but I don't have $1 million to throw away. If we could cover all those tunnels along that highway with solar-powered motion cameras, monitoring them 24/7, 365 days a year for a period. Now, I have no idea how long this would take, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and would have to be done in secret so you wouldn't get idiots going out there with ghillie suits and playing games.
Yeah, that'd be an integral part.
Yeah, and you get photographic evidence of every large animal, man size or up at these tunnels, and you don't get a Sasquatch, that would convince me that there's probably no Sasquatch to get. And as I was talking about Banff National Park, they did the same thing. The Trans-Canada Highway goes right through Banff National Park, right? And I had reports, and I looked into reports along the highway myself. In the early 1980s to mid-1980s, they had what was called the Red Flag Program because there were so many animals being killed, they just wanted to get people to slow down, you know? And there were hundreds of these little red flags. Everything from a squirrel to a grizzly bear was marked where they were killed by cars. It was terrible. They finally gave up on that, and they built wildlife fences all along the highway there. And they made tunnels for the wildlife to get through. And after they realized a lot of bears and stuff weren't using them, they decided to make overpasses over the highway, covered in trees. Okay?
Yeah, I've seen those.
Now, since the mid-1990s, they have been covering these overpasses and tunnels with cameras. Okay? The only out is the cameras are not 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. They put them out a week here at this crossing, then they'll move them to another crossing and stuff like that. So that's the out. In the years since the mid-1990s, they have video evidence of every animal we know exists in the Rocky Mountains of Alberta and eastern BC, except one. And guess which one that one is? Why? That bothers the hell out of me. They even got footage of very strange-looking people. So, yeah, it's been picked up. And now, it's just happening right now as we speak. The I-5 in Washington State, north of Vancouver, they're building wildlife crossings. I always wondered, how would a thing like the Sasquatch cross Interstate 5 in western Washington State? Because it goes all the way from the Canadian border, all the way down through Oregon, down to Northern California. Anything getting to the western part of the coast, to the interior of Oregon and Washington State, has to cross I-5. And they're now, and unlike Canada, apparently these cameras they're putting on these new wildlife crossings are going to be 24/7, 365 days a year. So I think the next 5 years, they've already got some amazing footage of animals they didn't think were around those areas anymore. And let's see what happens there in the next 5 or 6 years. If they don't 10 years go by and there's no Sasquatch on any of that footage, I really got a question.
Yeah, that carries a similar relation to the whole some of the research I'm gonna be getting involved with in the coming year kind of has the same purpose in the end, that you're kind of going to start putting a thumbs up and a thumbs down to this. Okay, if this method isn't going to work to prove its existence, I'm not saying it proves that it doesn't, but boy, it's a pretty big bullet in the gun for those who want to say,
yeah,
dude.
Well, see, Thomas, I've been having like a similar thought along that, because, you know, from my position, right? I want to know if what I experienced out there, if Sasquatch isn't real, then why am I having the experience that I had in the woods and other people who have encountered them? Look, I know that I'm being absolutely truthful about what happened to me that day in the woods. And I cannot refuse to believe that I'm the only one being truthful about such experiences.
Yeah.
So if Bigfoot isn't real, then that's why I say I'm a searcher for answers, man. Really, that's what I am, and that's what I've always been, apparently. I want to know, why is it, if this thing is not real, why are we seeing these things? There's got to be a reason why.
Oh, yeah. And to answer Uncle Bones,
oil down to we're all delusional. I mean, that doesn't make sense to me.
No, it doesn't make sense. And I would kill to have an experience like yours. And Joe, and I realized that someone like me must sound like a madman. If you saw what you saw,
you absolutely don't sound like a madman.
Me still questioning whether or not they exist. I must sound like a complete moron to you.
No, you don't. Absolutely not. That's why I follow what you say, because I believe in your approach to this thing. Even if I can stand there and sit here and know that, oh my God, this is something that Thomas hasn't seen. But that's the thing, is I can put myself in that position. I can look at this objectively, even though it's all very subjective. I can look at it objectively and understand, why. Because what I saw out there isn't supposed to exist according to most people. And yet there it was. And it's, I can't prove it to anybody other than what
we weren't in your head.
I'm no closer to showing that these things are real than anybody else out there.
Mm-hmm.
Thomas, did you want to comment on this? I know you were.
Okay, I'll take Uncle Bones. Everything else uses them. Why wouldn't a Sasquatch?
Here's the other thing that I would present to Uncle Bones, and I always try to find references in science that we've shown before in different characteristics of different animal behavior, things like that. Not saying that mirrors how a Sasquatch would behave, but it's data to consider. Uncle Bones spent some time out here in South Dakota growing up, where I grew up. And one of the interesting things about South Dakota is directly in the center of the state, north and south, is the Missouri River running that is between 2 and 4 miles wide, depending on where you're at. And there's a half a dozen bridges that go over it for interstate traffic, railroads, whatever. But for 300 miles, these reservoirs, that state is divided in two by that river. And we have mountain lines that are coming from western South Dakota and ending up in the Big Sioux River Valley of eastern South Dakota. And I always wondered, dude, are they jumping on the back of a semi and riding over? I mean, seriously, how are they getting over here? It just does not seem plausible that a mountain lion, I'm not going to say it can't swim across a little river, but to swim, for it to stand on a shoreline and look at another shoreline 3 miles away and say, man, I got to get over there, doesn't make sense to me. But you know what? that's what they're doing.
Yep.
They
That's
proved
crazy.
that's what they're doing. It makes no plausible
No,
sense
that's
to
insane.
anyone.
And I had another point to what Uncle Bones said. They monitored these crossings in Banff National Park enough. Every animal you can think of has been photographed and videotaped on these crossings, except Sasquatch. And I have to wonder about, why wouldn't they use them? They know enough that they determined in Banff National Park that grizzly bears that were alive when the crossings were first built would have nothing to do with them. They wouldn't go near them. But grizzly bears born and weaned after their construction don't seem to have a problem with them.
Yeah.
They know that. Yeah.
Jeff, if I can touch on what you were talking about a little bit earlier about the information side of things, something popped into my head. Well, that was in, I think I might have talked to Doug about it. I might have talked to Joe about it. I'm not sure if I talked with you about it. But in our area, my area in 2017, there's 100% factual data. I'm not going to say evidence, I'll say data, that the police chief had been emailing someone regarding the Bigfoot subject, the Sasquatch subject. And that's a fact. That's indisputable. It's been covered. It was leaked from the media. So we know that was true. Whether or not it was a joke or not, that's the thing that needs to be argued. But I've been trying to FOIA request those email threads that he had with this person since 2019. And every time I do it, I get an exemption. And the only reason you're going to get an exemption is for like privacy. If it's a public figure, so that doesn't really count.
It's an infringement on something.
Right. But the exemptions they were giving me were weird exemptions. Like it's a national security issue. Why would that be a national security issue? And the guy's a public servant. So like I said, I've been doing this since 2019. I've had some lawyer friends help me out. Because of the FOIA request, you just need to change a couple of little words here and there, and then boom, you'll get some information. But since 2019, we know those emails were sent. We know there's a thread there, but I haven't been able to get any information from that.
That's interesting. It opens up a whole can of worms as far as, is there really a concerted effort to keep some things from coming forward? Is it possible an effort to prove the existence of this gets a little too close to the sun and somehow they're held accountable or they face a setback? I'm not here to advocate one way or the other on that, but I certainly understand why people have conversations about it. It's something that I've experienced as far as not being able to find an explanation to. Why would this happen? Why would that happen, right? You look at 4 or 5 possible options, you apply that scientific method, and you don't throw away the bottom 2, you set them aside. So that I'm looking at the more likely reasons on the surface at my starting point. I'm looking at what's the most plausible, and I start working as tenaciously to prove them wrong as I do to prove them right. Despite the fact that I've had an encounter and seen what I believe is a Sasquatch, I have to apply that method and try to disprove something with the same tenacity as I am trying to prove it. And I find myself disproving the possibility of 1, so I have to go to 2. I might have to go to 3. I may have to take one of those ones that I discounted and bring that back into the conversation to consider. It's a method that I don't know is really fairly applied by a lot of people just because they're so quick to try to prove what they want their hypothesis to arrive at.
Evidence goes both ways. It's just not proving thing. It's also disproving. So
it is. And I'll give you an example again, Jeff. For 40 years, I was so pig-headed when witnesses told me it had the eyes reflected a bright red color. Mm-hmm. I was so, why are you telling me this? Why are you trying to make it sound scary? I've seen eye reflection from all kinds, every kind of wildlife you can imagine, and it's always white, maybe a little pinkish, a little orangish. Why do you always have to say, trying to make it sound scary? It's eyes do not reflect bright red. Then August 2019 at 3 o'clock in the morning on the east side of Harrison Lake, I saw a bright red eye reflection myself. I'm not saying this was a Sasquatch. As a matter of fact, when I first saw them at the head of my high beams, they were only like raccoon height off the right-hand side of the road, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and at first I thought I was looking at old reflectors on an old signpost or something. They were bright red. Then they turned away. And I stopped and I pulled over and I realized there's like a 9-foot ditch there that my car went into it. It would completely disappear. So what that was, I have no idea. But the eyes reflected bright red. Boy, did I eat crow.
You know,
I have to apologize to every witness who ever told me the eyes reflected bright red. Yes, I was wrong. It is possible to have bright red eye shine. It's not impossible. I finally saw it myself.
It brings us back to where we started, Thomas, when you said we need to take a hard look at any data or evidence that's brought forth, but we have to do it open-minded.
Right.
We have to, because I'm just telling you, I regardless of what I hear anybody share with me, I have to operate on a foundation that because something hasn't happened to me doesn't mean it couldn't have happened to you. That does not mean I'm gullible. It doesn't mean that you get an automatic free pass on my endorsement of your story. It simply means I acknowledge that I have not experienced all there is to experience. Otherwise, I'd solve the mystery right now for everybody. You know?
Yeah.
So I think what Thomas just shared is a perfect example of that. You can be so convinced of something and find yourself standing, looking at something going, oh my gosh, I was wrong.
Well, props to Thomas for actually, admitting he was wrong and taking accountability for that. People who don't do that in this community.
I put a lot of credibility into people who are able to do that. When Brent came on my show, and he shared it in plenty of places before my show, obviously, but he's talked about when he was kind of new at looking at stuff, and he looks back at what he kind of fell for, in his own words. There's probably a little bit of pride involved in that when you look back. There's a little embarrassment. There's a feeling of a little gullibility, but yet, you know what? I want to help somebody learn from this so that they don't end up making the same mistake that I did. And I think that's a huge thing that comes with what Thomas is sharing here, is that ability to be so convinced amongst an opinion or a hypothesis. And when you find evidence that shows that does not support what you've subscribed to, that's a difficult place for people to find themselves in. It really is.
Well, I touched on this before. Look, it's easy to become convinced of something or convince yourself of something. I mean, the thing about what even got me started in this as a kid, man, I was, convinced for the longest time that had to have been a Bigfoot. When I was in my 30s and I had that experience out in George Washington National Forest in Virginia, I was convinced for years that had to be Bigfoot. And till I finally really was looking objectively into it, forced myself to look at each of those incidences and really analyze them and pick them apart. And then I realized, no. I was making myself believe something that I had absolutely not enough evidence to arrive at that conclusion.
Yeah.
And it sucks because it was wishful thinking. My God, I wished it was Bigfoot, right? But wishing don't make something real, man. I mean, so you have to look at that, and you have to change and be willing to accept new information and really analyze and try to, like I said, I know it's so very subjective. My encounter is so very subjective. I was there, you know, but you have to be able to look at things objectively sometimes and make yourself do that. I had to make myself actually do that, you know, because I didn't want to be wrong about those two incidences.
I think the problem is that,
but I don't believe that it had anything to do with Bigfoot. I don't have the evidence that proves that.
But I think the problem is that sometimes people get tunnel vision. Their peripheral literally goes blind to other things. There's one thing that I interviewed Leon Thompson about and feature in my book that's coming out here in the next week or two is a section, and I'll just share this part with you. He was telling me a story about two pilots in a plane. They had a warning light on that said part of their landing gear wasn't coming down. Of course, they aren't able to tell themselves. So they diverted. They still had plenty of fuel to get to where they were going. They diverted a different route to do a flyby a tower at an airport to visually tell. And they were like, well, we see it almost appears that the door's partway open, but we can't tell if it's up or if it's down. Can you fly by again? And they kept working on this because this warning light would not go off. And they were so tunnel visioned on fixing this problem, they ran out of fuel and crashed that plane.
Yeah, you're talking about Flight 401?
Oh,
yeah.
Everglades? Yeah.
They ran out of fuel and crashed that plane
because it wasn't they ran out of fuel. They were so concentrated in the light, they think the captain nudged the wheel and the automatic.
Oh, yeah, that might be it.
And the plane started to slowly descend, and they didn't even realize it.
Yeah, they just got so tunnel visioned on what they thought was the answer to their problem. They didn't realize another problem existed at all. And I think it's kind of exemplary of Bigfoot theory for some people. They work so hard to prove something that they're not catching the data that's presenting itself in the process that proves they're wrong or shows them different data that doesn't work to support what they're looking at. That's just blind in their peripheral.
Yeah.
Well, there's other people that see that data and they on purpose discount it because they've doubled. We call this, there's probably a name for it, but we all are aware of different people, different personalities that have put forth evidence that they claim to be real. People disprove it, pretty convincingly disprove it online, and yet they keep double down on it. And now I don't know if it's a matter of pride or if it's a matter of there's too much money being made on going the other direction. You know, I don't know what those reasons are, but I've seen people 7 times double down on something that's being proven wrong. And I don't, to be blind to the data that shows you're wrong isn't just a disservice to the community. It really speaks a lot about the disservice it is to you in doing so, because there's probably a lot of areas in your life that's occurring and not in a good way. But
I think we're going to get a lot of the doubling down, especially with the wave of artificial intelligence. You're going to get a lot of people claiming they found this, doubling down on that, and trying to push their own narrative. But that's coming. If it's not already here, it's coming.
Yeah,
and that's why, as a researcher, I always did like that term research. I think investigator would be a better term. You're trying to find an answer to a mystery, and you have to accept the possibility that in the end it could turn out we were wrong.
Oh,
you know, there are so many people who call themselves researchers today. They're more like religious fanatics trying to push a faith than finding an answer.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I think the word researcher, and I got it in the name of the thing, Pine Island Research.
Yeah.
I don't know if people realize, when you start checking to see what store in your area has the lowest prices on Coke products, you're researching,
Sure.
And Joe made a comment on his show earlier tonight when he said that when I go out and look for data and do this, I do this for me, right? I'm not trying to prove to the world that Bigfoot exists. I don't call myself a researcher. I'm not trying to prove to the world. I think a lot of researchers aren't trying to prove anything to the world. I'm driven by my own experience. I really want to have a better understanding of what I stood in front of and saw that day. And that's really what drives me. But whether I don't anticipate, unless I end up with a body in the back end of my truck to haul over to the Walmart parking lot and show everybody, I don't anticipate that I'm going to come up with much that's going to prove to the world anything. There'll always be people that question what you have short of a body and or a body part or something that, you know. But with that being said, I don't ever want to make anybody feel that whatever data you have to present, whether it's an encounter or an experience yourself or something you've noticed, the more data that's out there on the table to consider, the better. If it's authentic data, if it's not faked, if what you're telling me happened to you, if what you're describing you saw in the woods is as if the picture of forest language is you walked up on it and saw that, not saying a human didn't build it other than you, but if you're saying you didn't, it's data to consider. I don't think these things hurt this discussion, but what hurts the discussion is the people that are lined up just to tip over at anything they look at. That's hurting the discussion.
Yeah.
But Eric, what tell me a little bit about as you've looked. I'm most familiar with what you shared on Doug's show and on my show, the pictures of the carving that was in front of that building. Yeah. The building was off the grid. I'm curious, did you ever find out more about the history of the building or ever come up with more?
I did find a little bit of history on not necessarily that building, but there might be more from what I understand. I did find a spelunking, a book written by a spelunking group in 1968 that documented, I think 300 caves in my county alone. And they were estimating there could be up to 3,000 caves in the area. And some of those, they did have working similar to that, the one that you're talking about. But recently I did a live stream about an area that was very close to where the Brushy Creek is, the Brushy Creek area. And I don't know if you saw that, but there was a carving of a similar face. This one actually had fangs, it had glinting eyes, and it had pointed ears. And I have that picture still. The only picture we know of that was taken in 1965, close to that same area, kind of the same motif of a carved face. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure about the size. There's only one picture of it. But in that area, they're talking about there's more of those carvings. And the settlers that were settling in that area, they were the ones that saw it, and they described it, saying that they called it the Bear Man. And that was a legend that the Tonkawa Native Americans in that area had. And again, they talk about not only that carving, but the other carvings that are supposedly in that area. So hopefully when the weather starts getting a little better, I'm going to make my way out there and get some new pictures of that.
I'm curious to see where you end up. Because, when you shared those pictures, everybody, it's one of the most active nights we've ever had in chat, because everybody's really trying to explain references that they've seen in their lives that depict that. And a lot of it was, in the 60s and early 70s, there was kind of an art form that was a motif often featured. A lot of people mentioned totem poles and things but really, I thought it had more of Pacific Islander type.
I thought the exact same thing.
To
Yeah.
it than
I thought
what you would normally associate with Native American totem pole art.
Well, Jeff, it looks totally out of place. I mean, it's
in Texas, it does look. If it's
totally
Pacific Islander, it's a little out of place in Texas.
Yeah, and if you see the features, it has an elongated nose. The head's long. The teeth are long. I mean, it has dots on the face, kind of what you would think of when you think of like Pacific Islander or something like that. All really weird. And I don't know if you have to check out this other face that I found, Jeff, because this one it has fangs. It has freaking fangs on it. You know, like,
oh, wow.
Why would anyone carve that or anything like that? So hopefully I'll get out there and be able to take some high definition pictures of it. And I've been told, and I need to reach out again to contact. I believe it's Scott Walters. I believe he had the show on history, the America Unearthed, I believe is what it was. He's a geologist, a forensic geologist is what he calls himself. So I'd really like to get his opinion and say, hey, have you seen anything similar to this? Where have you seen it? How was this made? How long ago do you think it might have been carved? But totally out of place. And the fact that it, not only that, but it was accompanied by a 3,000-pound vault door that was used to seal this area. And then it was buried. Whoever made this thing buried it in dirt and branches. And so there's a big mystery there that I've been
all of
on.
that, all of those simple descriptives that you just shared, each one on their own, you think, well, stuff gets buried. Well, stuff gets this. Yeah. It's when you start adding it all up into a storyline that it becomes difficult to place a plausible explanation as to what was the purpose of that or why was it that happened. And certainly I don't look at that as proof of anything, but it makes me become more curious to understand the origin of what's going on there.
Well, I'm telling you, that area, there's been sightings associated with Sasquatch. I call it the hairy man. That's what it's been called here for a long time. Since the 1800s, there have been, we have the Hairy Man Road that's not far from where that was taken, off the Brushy Creek. So it's, and you asked if I had more information. I actually went back there. They have the purple paint on the trees now. So no way I'm going any further in there after that. Absolutely not. That's not happening. Maybe if I had a drone, I might try to, fly over it or something. But
if it gets shot down, at least you go home, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Thomas, right. I'm curious as we were talking a little bit about what Eric had shown. In your findings of all the things that you've investigated, outside of people's accounts, outside of the experiences, photographic evidence, things like that, have you ever really seen like carvings or depictions of something that really made you start wondering, what am I looking at here? Have you?
Well, of course, all up and down the West Coast, Washington, Oregon, you have totems or story poles, as they call them, totem poles, the Sonaquah, the Bookwas, all kinds of things, all up and down the coast. Different First Nations had different names for them. They all had different beliefs of what they were and what they were capable of, but they were all basically talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've often felt like when I've had this conversation with Steve Kulls and Joe and Leon before that, when you have the skeptic versus believer conversations, right? And the talking points, the bullet points that are typically regurgitated in these discussions, I often felt like one of the most powerful things that as a believer, somebody believes it's possible that these could exist, is that I don't find a plausible explanation for how somebody got drunk around a campfire 10,000 years ago and told a story, and this thing got depicted on cave walls around the world, woven into centuries upon centuries of Native American folklore, depicted on totem poles, depicted in literature from past presidents. I mean, it's just like, how did we're not talking about in the day of smartphones and the internet and everything else. We're talking about one person supposedly came up with this concept, and to varying degrees, but pretty much with a common theme, it's become depicted from cave walls to totem poles to folklore to literature, and then you factor in tens of thousands of encounters. If I'm trying to find a plausible explanation to explain how that could have happened, that's the most difficult part of the conversation for me. Yeah, it's almost harder to explain how that could have happened than it is to explain why I feel they exist, or what is my, why, how do I subscribe to that theory, right? And I think a lot of people get tripped up with that. 10,000 encounters can't be wrong. Well, you know, it's not just that. It's everything in totality that starts.
It's interesting that of all the First Nation or Native American legends and folk history, of all the strange creatures they had in their mythology, this one kept going.
Yeah.
You know, the Europeans, we had things in our mythology that generations in the past believed in, we now know are just mythology.
Yeah.
You know, but this one keeps going. However, there's another example, another phenomena that's taken off in the last 20 years. Yeah, called the Dog Man.
Yeah.
Now, until the late Linda Godfrey wrote her book, The Beast of Brer Road, I never heard of a single Dog Man sighting. But when that book came out, it started something, and now they're all over the place.
I always wondered why they call it the Dog Man and not the Wolf Man.
Well, there were reports before Linda Godfrey and the Bray Road incidents in French Canada, what they call the loup-garou, which is basically a term for werewolf, which I don't think these things could be, because werewolves are nasty creatures, and we'd have people disappearing all the time if they actually existed. Yeah, but I'm just pointing out, until Linda Godfrey wrote that book, and it's an excellent book about a case of what was happening in that Bray Road, I never heard of a single incident anywhere.
You know,
now they're all, matter of fact, in some areas they're outstripping Sasquatch. It's like they thought Sasquatch is too boring, so they've come up with something more exciting.
What her book did, when you look at, it's almost like when we talk about post-war and pre-war, you know, in reference to things chronologically. There's a lot of things, like you're saying, that her book seems to be the fence that separated nothing from everything.
Yeah.
And to some degree, I can even say that when some of these discussions that fringe on ufology with aliens and things like that, post-Matrix, you know, versus pre-Matrix. I mean, some of the details in these discussions didn't exist. It's like culture kind of nurtured it along to some degree. Not to say that, you know, when it comes to aliens and things, you're always going to have the Area 51 discussions, and, you know, there's a lot of evidence that shows, at least evidence to be considered, that shows there is some evidence out there to consider. I mean, that's all I'll say. But I'm like you, Thomas. When it comes to Dogman, I would tell you this: in order for it to exist, I believe that there would have to be some type of supernatural explanation for it, because from a flesh and blood standpoint, I don't see a slot that it would fit into. And when it comes to me researching anything, I always start at the flesh and blood standpoint. That's where I start. That's the most plausible, most sensible place to start. That does not mean that it doesn't mean that I'm closed-minded to the discussion of, could they do this or that. I'll have that conversation with you, but I have to start somewhere in looking at this. And I don't know where you start with Dogman. I don't see the starting point.
Well, that's reasonable, Jeff. And, you know, people that believe in the supernatural are going to get upset because you don't believe in the new, but that's a reasonable stance to start with, because there is no evidence of the supernatural existing. Okay. And until such time, I cannot consider. I must consider everything from a naturalistic point of view.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
not.
that's right.
I'm-
Dogman, evolutionary wise, there is absolutely no possible evolutionary.
I stumble with that. When it
Yeah.
comes to the supernatural existing, I am very open-minded to the supernatural. But I will tell you this:
Give me evidence.
I think that there is an awful lot of support and evidence out there that over the last century, especially, you place yourself back in the 30s and look at what will come about in the 50s, and you place yourself in the 50s and look at what came about in the 80s. When it comes to technology, when it comes to science, when it comes to understanding the answers to the questions that existed and where we're at now, there's a lot of things that people would have said 30, 50, 70, 100 years ago. They would have said there has to be a supernatural explanation to it just because they don't understand how it could be. And yet science has revealed that's not the case.
Yeah. Well, look, I will not deny that there's weird stuff that can't explain that happens in this world. But weird stuff I can't explain does not mean the answer is it must be supernatural because it's weird and I can't explain it.
Yeah. I accept the possibility of the supernatural, but to me, the Sasquatch question is a zoological mystery.
Yeah,
you know, I don't think that there may be a paranormal or a supernatural, but it's got nothing, in my opinion, and I'm only expressing my opinion, it's got nothing to do with the Sasquatch. But I'm open-minded enough that I'm willing to be convinced I'm wrong on that. I was wrong with the red eye reflection. Maybe I'm
absolutely.
Wrong. You know, and if I ever see a Sasquatch coming out of a portal and stuff, I'll let you know.
Yeah. Thomas, I find myself in that same place simply because I wrestled with how this thing could move 50 yards from A to B, from where I first heard this to where I saw it, very close to me. How could it do that in no wind, complete still, a ton of moisture in the air? I mean, if I clicked my thumb like that from 50 yards away from you, you would hear it echo 3 times. I mean, it was just did not make sense how, with all the deadfall on the ground, the cedar scrubs, all this stuff, how it could navigate terrain like that 50 yards and not make any noise. Then I found myself when I was in the military at Fort Benning, Georgia, working with the 2nd of the 75th Ranger Battalion, and I seen a guy who'd been in that unit for 14 years move from A to B through some inhospitable terrain at a speed and at a silence that did not seem humanly possible to me. And I simply realized that the guy who's been in that unit for a year can't do that. This guy does it because for 14 years, he lived and breathed that environment. And when we are simply out looking for evidence, looking for data, how often are we in that environment, really? I mean, some of us are out there quite a bit during the course of a year, but yet our survivability doesn't depend on how good we are at navigating it. For something that lives in that environment 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for decades, it could simply get so good at moving from A to B that your human brain cannot conceive that it's possible. I believe that is a more plausible explanation than something supernatural about it. I don't think
out of a prime example what you're talking about. I saw myself. We went in this area near Bragg Creek, Alberta, when I was back in Alberta, and this thick. It was just this area was so thick. We couldn't move without sounding like a battalion. You know, you couldn't move without cracking 15 little branches. You know, you couldn't do it. There's no way you could win. And we saw the head and rack of a full-size bull moose peeking out of this stuff, and it saw us, and it drew back in, and it went away, and we never heard a single twig break.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nothing. How the hell that thing did that? I don't know, but it never ever broken, and we couldn't even move to shift to look more closely at where it was without sounding like a herd of elephants going through this stuff. It was terrible. I don't know how this big animal with this big rack on its head went through this thick stuff and never even cracked a twig.
Yeah.
I can't figure that out. But nature is
right.
Another incident. I was sitting near Timber Creek, all by myself, had my fire going, relaxing, and something was coming through. It sounded like a bull moose coming, charging through me. I'm thinking, oh God, what's coming? I was actually thinking of reaching for my shotgun, my Land Rover. And I was all ready for something, and I had a big log, fallen log there right on the bush line. What popped up on that log? A squirrel.
Yeah, yeah.
How did that little thing make that racket?
I tell you, I have laid in a tent, Thomas. I have laid in a tent at 3 a.m. in a very remote area and heard a chipmunk in a potato chip bag that I didn't realize was left outside. And it sounded like Bigfoot was tearing the tailgate off of my truck. I mean, I was like, what the hell is going on out there?
That's hilarious.
I mean, nature plays strange tricks. Animals make strange noises. Like a mountain lion will make noises that people hear.
Yeah.
That don't sound anything like the old Disney nature films we always used to watch, you know, and it's incredible. That's why when it comes to noises and sounds and vocalizations, in my opinion, unless you saw what did it, there could be other explanations for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
I know a lot.
I have personal experience of just what you just said, Thomas, about the cougar, man.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was used to that Disney representation of what the cougar sounds like.
Yep.
Until that night, Molly and I heard that scream in the woods, and I mean, I knew what it wasn't. I knew it was not a bobcat or a fisher or anything like that because I've heard them. This was a totally new thing that I had never heard before. My brain automatically went banshee. You know, even though I'm not, you know, I don't believe in the supernatural, a lack of belief in the supernatural, but automatically that's because that noise was like crazy, man. But I found out by doing some research, I found out what it was, and it was a cougar. And I still have that video downloaded that I found of that noise that this cat in this video was making, man. And
I think that's a common problem with Class B encounters that involve vocalization, is that people consider themselves knowledgeable about the sound that different animals in their areas can make, but they're not familiar with the range of sounds that animal could make. Hearing a lynx or a bobcat or a cougar simply roar or whatever sounds completely different than one screaming during mating season, especially for a lynx in the middle of the night. Even one purring, to hear one purring and kind of growl purring, you hear that and think, what is that? I know a mountain lion goes roar. I know what sound it makes. That's not that. Yeah, it is. It's just, there's some animals that we associate a noise that we reference them making. Like as you're a kid, the little spin around thing, you pull the string, cow goes moo, right? You ever heard a cow beller when it can't find its calf?
Yeah.
Sounds a lot different than that little thing did, you know? I mean, and some people just aren't familiar with the range of sound something could make. I remember one time walking a trap line, coming up on a bobcat that was caught in a leg trap, and the sound it was making didn't sound like it was from this earth. I mean, it was freaking the horroring. And if somebody would have said that's a bobcat, I would have bet every dollar in my account that's not a bobcat, you know. But it's in a trap and it's in duress and it's freaking out, and it doesn't sound like what I would associate it would normally sound like. But,
just a few years ago, outside of Sasquatch Provincial Park, I'm walking there, not too far from where the entrance is in the woods, and I hear this growl behind me. It was almost like a half growl, half roar. And I thought, oh, God, a bear. I turned around. It was a mule deer.
Yeah.
I didn't know deer roared.
A mule deer's grunt, especially pre-rut, a mule deer's grunt doesn't sound like a white-tailed deer's grunt. A white-tailed deer, I think everybody knows it's like,
too, man. I mean, they got something that sounds like a growl, because that buck that was charging me that time, he was making that noise, and I was like, "Oh, shit, I didn't know that deer could growl, dude."
Oh,
and
yeah.
it's like,
I've heard a goat scream bloody murder. You think it was a woman was being killed or something, and it was a goat that just got separated from its baby. It was scary. It was middle of the night.
Imagine, Jeff, like you were saying, just imagine me as a small kid, ripped out of the city and thrown into the country, and then having to learn everything about how to keep yourself occupied and learning how to hunt, because that's what you do, you know. And just imagine somebody like that the first time you ever hear a rabbit in distress.
Yeah. A
What does that sound? You have no idea what it is, right? And first time I ever heard it, no idea what the hell is that, you know.
I remember I took a youth group camping one time in Colorado on 9 Mile Lake. And there was a lot of bears in the area, a lot of black bears in that area. But, you know, and it was primitive camping. We weren't in a cabin. We were staying in tents, and you had to hike 2 miles back to where the camp area was. And that night, there was about 14 kids out there, and there's 3 of us adults. Well, all 3 of us adults were hunters. We're familiar with the outdoors. But we were sitting around the fire having a drink. All the kids had gone to bed. They're high school age kids. And I remember that night there was a white-tailed deer that did a snort wheeze really close to us, where it's like like that, you know. Now, if you're a hunter, you've heard that 100. You know, for us guys around the fire, we kind of laughed about like, wow, that buck's close. These kids were coming undone in their tents. They'd never heard that before. They thought all their brain was telling them was run. So it's just a reference. It's a library of reference. We talked about that, Joe, last week, how somebody who lives in Metro Colorado or Metro Chicago, and they're driving through Yellowstone Park with their family once a year on vacation, and they see a black bear on its hind legs 300 yards away next to a tree line. What they interpret that to be, and what somebody who says, I've been hiking these woods since I was 10 years old, what they would interpret to be, you have the same encounter story being shared, but a different reference, a different library of reference of what that could have been from those 2 individuals. And to me, that is really, I think there comes a lot of stock that I put into the integrity or that vetting process of the source of an encounter. You don't have to be a cop. You don't have to be some military guy. You don't even have to be a hunting guy. But somebody who doesn't have experience in the outdoors, or, you know, isn't there very often, versus somebody who's spent a lot of time in the outdoors, automatically there's a different degree of reference that exists. But it gets better and better, that degree of reference. A guy who says for 30 years I was a forestry worker for the U.S. Forestry Service in Montana. Dude, there ain't much that's capable of being made by a vertebrate mammal sound-wise that he probably hasn't heard in that area. You know?
Yeah, I often told Molly that I wish I had got to meet her father, but because he worked for the Forestry Service, and he spent a lot of time out in very remote areas and fire towers. And so I always told her I would like to have met him, because one of the first things I would ask him about is what are some of the strangest things that he's ever seen or heard while he was in those fire towers, and if he ever thought he'd ever seen a Bigfoot. I would love to, because that man could tell me whether or not, hey, yeah, I think I might have seen or this, or he'd be like, nope. But it'd be interesting to hear, because if it's out there, I'll bet he's probably seen it.
Yeah, I agree. Joe, I'm going to play something real quick, and I invite anybody who's got any questions they want to ask the panel. You don't have to super chat it in order to ask a question. Just put it in all caps. But I am going to play this real quick, and then we'll spend the last 20 minutes maybe addressing any questions that anybody in chat has for the panel.
Show your support for the Untold Radio Network family of shows and join in on the conversation by using super stickers and super chats on YouTube. Got a question you want answered? Ask it live via a super chat and get real-time responses from our show's knowledgeable hosts and guests. Help keep the Untold Radio Network shows running strong. We need your support. Send your super chats and stickers now.
All right. I got to get used to playing that earlier in the show. I never do. I often forget to do it. But I appreciate everybody choosing to spend their Monday nights with us, regardless of whether or not they utilize that. Uncle Bones wanted to let you know, appreciated you buying a super sticker earlier. Thank you so much. But yeah, if anybody's got any questions they want to ask Thomas, Eric, or Joe or myself, just put them in all caps and we will try to address them here as we spend the last, 15, 20 minutes talking about the subject. I'm a little bit curious as to if any of you three have had when it comes to sharing evidence. I mean, obviously Joe understands prior to you sharing your encounter that there is no guarantee that everybody will believe this. Both of us, before we ever shared our encounters, knew up front there'll always be people who don't believe us. There's no guarantee to that. But do you think that there are researchers out there or people who are simply in the field, if we want to stay away from that term, that are maybe moving the ball a little bit when it comes to videos that have been collected that or other areas that they simply aren't releasing because they just assume sit on it than have it be out there getting critiqued? I mean, I'm kind of curious.
I've seen some videos and pictures that haven't been released from a researcher that investigator, I'll say, that doesn't put his name out there. He's an unknown researcher, and I interviewed him for a documentary that I did, and he was covered up. He didn't want to say his name or anything like that. His stuff it's pretty amazing, the things he showed me. And again, he doesn't want to put it out there because he tells me, he said, what good is it going to do? It's not going to do me any good.
Yeah.
People are going to call me crazy, or they're going to go in the area and just destroy the area. But he's shown me some really, really interesting stuff. And I begged him, let me show this or let me share this. Absolutely no interest in it whatsoever.
I have
out
seen two different videos that were shared with me with the understanding that they have no want to release this data. And honestly, both of those videos, I've looked at them. I've had somebody else who's way better than me look at them at determining kind of if there's a technical red flag that could exist in them. And I gotta tell you, I'm kind of blown away that they aren't being looked at, but I have to also honor the fact that this person doesn't want to put it out there, right? I think that those people do get second opinions. I think they do ask other people in this community that they consider to have the ability to give some analysis of this for their own benefit, but they don't do it with any intention of releasing it. And I'm not saying that there's a right or wrong answer there. I mean, for me, if I had really good video, I may sit on that. I may sit on it knowing that my coming up project over the course of the next year is involving DNA collection. And if I could get that kind of what Patterson Gimlin had, which was very unique video,
right,
and footprints and had DNA existed, they likely would have had that too, because they knew exactly where it walked and what it touched. You know, it had if you can get more than just one of those, you know, audio, video, DNA, and castings, aside from a body part or a body, those are kind of those 4 objects that we're pursuing and trying to get that we would consider data to consider. I don't know if I had a video, if I'd release it knowing that I think it would be much more digestible if I released it, if I had DNA evidence, or there was also audio that I eventually captured from that same area. But, you know, I don't know. I will say this, I don't have that video, so I don't have to figure it out tonight.
The way you're talking about it, I think more people need to kind of look at it as a package, not necessarily a package, but a presentation, you know, because there's just too many videos of people, you know, stuff walking in the woods with no backstories, you know, no other data, just a figure in the woods. We got to get rid of that.
One of the most interesting home movies, and this was filmed in the late 70s, was taken by a man named Ford. And you may remember a series of events in the Honey Island Swamp area, Louisiana.
Okay, yeah.
He was a local researcher in the 70s who was just interested in the reports of this creature in the Honey Island Swamp area. And you saw him talking about footprint castings. They look like alligator tracks to me, but who knows? But he apparently shot a film that he never released. And it was after he died, his daughter found it. And it's a fascinating piece of footage.
That's interesting.
And I'd like to know a lot more about it. I've only seen it once. I think it was on shown on Leonard Nimoy's In Search of It one time.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't really much done with it. I'd like to find out more about it. On the other side, there is a researcher I was associated with who passed away a number of years ago, who had a photograph that I thought was fascinating. And I also knew that someone else would say, well, you know, the distance you were and stuff, it could be something else. You never know. But I was interested in it because this individual I had complete faith in, and the fact he said he saw it. Well, unfortunately, after he passed away, I found the original picture. And quite frankly, his whole story about how he came about it and where it was taken was a complete and utter lie. So he lied to me. So so it goes both ways. There's photograph and video, film and video evidence that may be intriguing and should be looked into more. And then you find out there's stuff that you had faith in, and then the truth hits you like a kick in the gut. When you
that's an interesting point, Thomas.
And I should have been suspicious because he always insisted, no, I don't want this picture published. And I wondered why.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about it all. I wondered why. I asked to include it in the Sasquatch of British Columbia book. He said no. And okay. He just, and his story was, I want to keep this between us, you know, so we look more about it. And well, I found out after he was gone that there was nothing to it. He had this picture with this odd thing in it. Instead of looking up at what he said was sky, was actually a sky reflected in a body of water. And the whole story about how he came about this picture just blew up.
Yeah.
And he lied to me. It's simple as that. Yeah.
Well, Thomas, it was interesting you brought up Louisiana, because the pictures I was mentioning from that researcher, 3 pictures he showed me were from a plot watcher, I believe what they call it.
Yeah.
In Louisiana, and those were they were really, really interesting. And it was from Louisiana. I don't know if it was that Honey Island area, but it was in Louisiana.
Yeah, really this fellow I'm talking about was named Ford, and I remember John Green talking about him, but he passed away in the late 70s, and whatever local, he wasn't really interested in Bigfoot, the Pacific Northwest, or Folk, Arkansas, or anything like that. He was just interested in the Honey Island Swamp mystery, right. and he was local. He looked into that, and it was his daughter that found this movie that he took in the Honey Island Swamp area that shows a figure That's definitely bipedal. Was this something he just? But I mean, you have to ask yourself: did he actually pick up something and kept it to himself,
Right?
or did he hoax it? And unlike Ivan Marks, he decided to keep it to himself. We will never know.
That's the, like I was saying earlier, when Doug looks at videos and other people that I think are fairly well accredited to having the skill to determine the validity of something, I stress on how a lot of what they're looking at isn't just the video, it's the story behind
Absolutely.
it and the information they gain from that person who shot it.
Mhm.
And Thomas is bringing up again another good example of post-mortem, the discovery of evidence shot by somebody that isn't here anymore is really that's a detriment to being able to really analyze what we're looking at. Now, there are exceptions to that, but certain video will stand on its own if it's good enough, and I've seen that happen too. It's happening now. But to answer Trackway's question, compared to said videos to Patty, the two videos that were shared with me that I've seen that I know have never been released, one of them I would say it's not as good as Patty. The other one is close. And the reason why I say it's close isn't the duration of it or the length of it. It's because it accurately depicts that foot laying down and being picked up. And to me, that is something that we are missing in so many videos out there. We look at the fluid of the movement, the length of stride, the speed, the lack of head bobbing, all these things, right? Arm length. But so often it seems like we don't see accurate representation of how a foot designed like that is being picked up and laid down like we actually see in the Patty video. So that's one reason why I did feel that one of the videos I saw really was super intriguing.
Well, I saw, this was one that Jeff Meldrum showed me on his phone. And it was a video, and it was just because I was talking to him, and he said, tell me what you think about this. And he showed me this video on his phone that somebody had sent him. And it was one of those ones that made me go, it definitely was something that was very large. You could tell that at least the movement of it, I could say, was well out of human range of movement. So it was a very intriguing video, but it wasn't something that I could definitely go, that's a Sasquatch. And now I've never seen it. It was pretty intriguing, man. I mean, I've never seen him post anything about it, and there's only two reasons that I could come up with why he didn't. But he showed it to me, but that he didn't post it and show it to everybody else was either he decided that it was just too inconclusive, whether we think it's actually one or not, is too inconclusive to say something about it or show it, or B, he found out that wasn't what we thought it could possibly be.
Yeah.
But it was one of those ones, and I've seen a few, but there's so many of them that, originally when I first came into the whole internet stuff, man, that I just thought, oh my God, yeah, that's gotta be real, I mean, I still hold to the fact that the Patterson-Gimlin Patty has gotta be a Sasquatch. Doesn't matter that she doesn't look like what I saw, but there could be a lot of reasons for that. Now, there's some that I thought just like had to be, and man, was I disappointed to find out they weren't, man. The Mississippi skunk ape thing, man, I swore to God that had to be real.
Yeah.
It wasn't, man. And I was shown the evidence that shows that this is not.
I've been intrigued so greatly by one picture that we captured ourselves, but a lot of the pictures that I really have been super intrigued by are the ones that don't really show a full body or something. Some of it is just an arm or something that I look at and I'm saying, we're really analyzing one component here and saying, how does that compare to a bear or this or that? And I find myself looking at those. Just as an example, I've shared the picture on my old channel in the past. I'll dig it up and share it again. But we have an area out in extreme western South Dakota in the Black Hills, which is, pretty forested area that we antelope hunt. And it's right on the northern edge of the Black Hills. So, I mean, we have a defined tree line, the base of a mountain, and literally 200 yards away, as you look to the north, it is flat open ground where we get a lot of antelope at. And the rancher owns the property, has a steel fence up around the property that he would put cattle in. But he had there's a water source in it, an artificial water source that attracts these antelope. And there were no cattle in this area at that time. Certain animals like antelope can get in the area because they can jump over just about anything. But like a buffalo, something like that, is not going to get into this area. And this picture is 3 different pictures of an arm reaching up on the fence post where you see like the base of the hand where the thumb would join a hand down the arm and the hair hanging about 8 inches off this arm. Now, I've had people look at it and say the only thing they thought it could be is possibly the neck of an elk sometimes at certain times of year will get kind of dangly like that. But in my mind, you could clearly see, maybe in one of the pictures you couldn't, but when you look at all 3 of the pictures, you could tell that this really appeared to be an arm with long hair hanging off of it in an area that there were no horses. They couldn't be in the area because it's fenced off. And, I found myself staring at, when you know the backstory and you look at pictures like that, I've seen other pictures that are kind of similar to that, just showing a component to consider. Because it seems like most often when I see a picture of what somebody says is a Sasquatch that's 50 yards away, taken with an IR flash, standing with 50 trees in the foreground and background, it's so inconclusive that you can't put any definition to anything,
It's funny you mentioned that the hair on the elbow and stuff, because the video I saw, it was unusually long length hair. Which, I don't know if people associate that with Sasquatch or not, but the hair was unusually long, hanging kind of like you said. So, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Really weird. And orange. So
Jay Fritz asked an interesting question. He says, ask Thomas, what's the most remote, eerie place he's ever been?
Erie at night. Most beautiful country you can imagine in the daytime. It had to be 2 places. One, Toba Inlet on the west coast of the British Columbia, where the Albert Ostman allegedly said he was captured in 1924. And another one is the many, many islands between Vancouver Island and the mainland, where I was on an expedition in 2016, where we encountered everything you could think of except what we were looking for. And that area at night, like there was one particular spot where an old cabin had been deserted. There was just something really eerie about the place. We thought we found footmarks in the grass, and we put out sensors and everything. And I remember the captain's daughter, she was there to help photography for the expedition. She kept saying, let's get the hell out of here. Let's get the hell out of here. Yeah, beautiful during the day. Beautiful at night, but creepy. And there's one thing about the West Coast rainforest here, unlike most of the rest of North America. At night, we don't have the vast amount of insects that other parts of the country do. So at night, it's dead quiet here. Your ears buzz. It's dead quiet here. Yeah. Those are probably the 2 most interesting and eerie places I've ever been. Yeah. Oh, there are a few places in the Rocky Mountains of Alberta, too, I can think of as well. Yeah. Bluff Creek is pretty creepy at night, too, I might add.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, you had another question up there from about me throwing baby out with a bathwater there.
Oh, I didn't understand what he was saying there, really, so I wasn't sure how to interpret that.
Put that up again.
Well, let me find it here. It was Uncle Bones. I think he threw it in a super chat here. There we go. Thomas, why would you throw away the baby over a road crossing?
Okay, I guess Uncle Bones is again referring to those overpasses in the Trans-Canada Highway in Banff National Park. I didn't say I've thrown anything out. I'm just saying it annoys the hell out of me that since the mid-1990s, since they covered these overpasses and tunnels and gotten footage of every animal we know exists in the Rocky Mountains except Sasquatch, why has that happened? Because before they were built, I personally looked into several reports along the Trans-Canada Highway in Banff National Park, including one where the creature was seen. The westbound lanes and the eastbound lanes are separated by an island of trees. So you can't see it. They were actually watching the creature in the area between. So there were a lot of reports of Sasquatch crossing the highway before the wildlife fences were built.
Yeah.
There have been reports on them on both sides of the fence since they were built, but nothing has been picked up in the tunnels or the overpasses since. Now, the only out of this, as I said, in Canada, the cameras are not 24/7, 365 days a year.
Yeah.
They put them at this crossing for a week, then they'll move them to that crossing another week.
And
so
if they have the capability,
it's getting to be a narrow out. Yeah, it's getting to be a narrow because it bothers the hell out of me that they can pick everything up, including some strange looking people, but they haven't gotten Sasquatch yet.
And that leaves that gap that we don't know.
Yeah.
I've had this conversation, probably over 100 hours of conversation with Doug. What are they capable of sensing? And everybody's got different opinions.
I am, for Uncle Bones' future, I am 90% convinced that a large higher primate does exist in the wilderness areas of North America. I'm 90%. I don't say 100 because I keep 10% off in case I'm wrong.
Yeah. Understandably so. But when the discussion of what could they be able to sense? An IR flash, a battery presence. There's so many opinions out there with no definitive proof that if I was able to sense that there's a battery presence or a power source or a camera or a UV reflection off the lens of a camera or whatever I may be capable of sensing, that's there, and I'm not going to pass there knowing that if I walk a couple miles down the road, there's one that's not at.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going. You've created this. You can't stop the leakage there of definitive data collection when you're moving the cameras around like that. It's tough.
All right. And answer Cajun Ninja's 1985 question: what films, if you can remember the names, have been released publicly? I think it's possible that we were talking about it earlier in the program. The Port Renfrew footage may actually show something. You can find that on YouTube if you look for it. It's either a bear or a Sasquatch, one of the two. We'll never know. There's a certain skunk ape video where it apparently goes after a snake I'd like to know a lot more about. I still think it's possible that the Jebediah State Park incident of 1995 showed a real Sasquatch. Other people disagree with me on that. I think it could be real. If it wasn't real, it was a hoax. One of the two. It wasn't mistaken identity. And we were just talking about the Mr. Ford's film from the 70s in Honey Island Swamp. I'd like to do a lot more looking at that.
Yeah. I think the key word in Caillou, I'll call him Tristan. He was a guest on my show a couple weeks ago. Tristan's question, he asked such great questions. I just love it when Tristan's asking questions. But the key word here is possibly, right. What do you feel possibly could be real? It's certainly not us endorsing something and saying that's got to be real, obviously. But how about you, Eric? What are your thoughts on that question?
It's really hard to say. I've seen some pictures that are interesting. I think there was one that I saw, I think Cliff Barackman's show where it was a subject and there was a stop sign for scale. And the thing's head was almost over the stop sign. And when they went to go measure it, it would have been like 9.5 feet tall or something like that. And I was like, well, that would be pretty hard to fake there. I mean, there's a few. I'm not sure if I know all the names to them all, but what was the one where like it's like running down a hill at really high speeds? I think they tried to replicate that. Maybe on MonsterQuest they tried to replicate that, and I don't know if they were able to do that or not.
Memorial Day footage?
Maybe it's that one. The only thing that kind of turns me off is the lady who's like, "Oh, it's a Bigfoot! It's a Bigfoot!"
Where it's running down the hill at an angle.
Yes, yeah, very steep, and they had a professional cross country runner, and he wasn't able to do it in that same time frame. So I thought it was interesting, but
well, actually, the runner was faster than it was.
Oh, I don't know if I saw that then. The one I saw was he wasn't able. He kept slipping on the terrain. That's the one that I saw. Yeah.
I'll tell you what I found out. It doesn't prove it one way or the other, but I found out when that Memorial Day footage was shot, the next field over, there was a paintball game area going on.
Okay.
Yeah.
The thing that I thought was weird was that it kind of got taller to where it ended.
That's where some people thought it was a young one on its back.
I thought that was weird.
I personally think it was the guy at paintball taking his face protection off because he's dying.
Could have been.
Who knows?
Who knows?
Joe, you got any videos that you think possibly might show something real as far as Sasquatch other than the PG film?
Well, see, I don't even know, man. I was gonna say, man. I mean, I guess I'm kind of stuck at the 5-yard line, but and the only reason I say that is because every other thing that I've seen is either, whether it's real or not, and whether I think it could be or not, it's inconclusive.
Sure.
Or what I thought was possibly genuine has been shown to me to be a hoax or something.
Well, I'm not asking you
so
you think prove it. I'm just kind of curious if there's some you lean towards and say, I don't feel that I could disprove that. That could be real.
I mean, the thing Melvin showed me, yeah. I mean,
there's one video I'd like to maybe send you guys. Thomas, I'd like you to take a look at it, see what you think. It was actually when I was shooting B-roll for a documentary that I was working on, and I had no idea there was anything in the footage. And when I put it out, people were like, "What's that? What's that?" And it's pretty interesting. I'll just say that.
There's another piece of footage. You remember a researcher from Ohio named Don Keating?
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, he took a video of something that he didn't notice at the time.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I went to that spot and looked at it, and it's fascinating. Maybe he did. I think the only reason why it appeared white is because the sunlight was overexposing the exposure, because half the leaves on the tree looked kind of white too when they weren't. And it possibly that what he was filming was actually more of a gray color, but it just appeared kind of white. But you only saw it for a second because he was swinging the camera around to get more footage of the lake.
That's kind of how this footage is. I was not paying attention. It's just for a split second, but you see something weird. I don't, something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Grasshopper has a point. Where Keating shot that video, there is a road.
Okay.
There is a road in that right behind where it was. And that was one of my thoughts. Maybe it was the back end of a van or something he just caught a glimpse of reflecting in the sunlight. Yeah. We don't know. But we'll never know. That's just the problem. Yeah.
It's a lot of this is how that question is framed. It was a great question, Tristan. But, I could be 90% sure that a certain video is not depicting an authentic Sasquatch movement. But that means that I've got 10% where I'm saying it's possible because I don't have definitive proof, right? So applying it with that perspective, my list gets longer, but I think the ones that have been, pretty well addressed have been addressed with some pretty poignant reasoning as far as where the concerns exist. Where I have a problem with is when we have got films where they say, well, that guy knew this guy, and therefore there's an issue. That doesn't prove anything, really. I mean, it's data to consider, and some people that's enough, but I've got to look at the video and really analyze what I'm looking at. And to answer what's his name's question about how those things the videos, the two that I saw and the ones that Eric saw, the stuff that Thomas maybe has seen, how they compare to the patio video. I thought you were talking about credibility wise, how convincing they were. If you're asking about descriptives, that's the one thing that made the one video that I said you could see foot placement in real well. It's so intriguing to me because I felt that you could see actual muscle movement in that thigh and down that calf, which is something that for me is one of the real poignant things to consider when looking at the patty video is the muscle flexing and movement versus just something that you couldn't reproduce through a suit back then. Not saying maybe you couldn't now, but now I don't think they try to reproduce it through a suit because Hollywood would just create it CGI anyway.
Exactly.
So
Yeah, exactly.
$300,000 to build a suit that shows muscle movement.
Well, one of the most fascinating things about the PG film for me, other than the fact that I know Bob Gibbon, I've known him for 30 years, and I can't believe he's been lying to my face all this time, was what they call the IM index of the subject of the film. That's the intermemoral index. That's comparing length of leg to length of arm, right? Human beings have an intermemoral index of between 55 and 60, right? Because our legs are much longer than our arms. The great apes have an intermemoral index in the hundreds because they have massive arms but very small legs. The creature in the Parrish and Gimlin film seems to have an IM index of about 90, which is a lot bigger than us compared to leg, but nowhere to the extent of the great apes.
This last couple of weeks, I seen that they had released some stabilized imaging of the PG film, which really made it quite intriguing to watch for a lot of people, just because you're seeing in a little bit different perspective, same angle, just steadier. It's one of the things I'm really excited for eventually when they complete the Legend Meets Science 2 documentary is that they are going to, they're bringing a perspective to the analysis of the PG film that hasn't been done before. And that's really going to be interesting. But I thought that image stabilization presentation of it was pretty intriguing. I think somebody mentioned it earlier in chat. I don't know if you guys saw that online or not yet, but
I did see it, yeah.
A lot different watching it when everything's level and not jerking around, But, well, I tell you guys, I just want to thank you so much for coming on. I know that the conversation, we kind of framed it as the future of Bigfoot research, kind of where it was during the PG era, where it is now, and maybe where it's going. I didn't think we'd spend that much time talking about maybe some of the fog that covers the battlefield with AI coming into play, but it's something that we just need to pay attention to as that technology develops. We look at all these different technology that we can use in our tools and tactics and the techniques that we employ to try to move the ball forward. When it comes to drones and thermal imaging and DNA technology, things like that. But we also look at, I think that we'd just be blind if we didn't include in the conversation the technology that's going to make it more difficult for us to analyze what's real and what's not real, And I loved the discussion we had. I love the stuff you guys have shared tonight. I think people appreciated it, and thank you so much for coming on the show.
It was a lot of fun.
You all three have standing invites whenever you want to join. I'd love to have you guys back too. But you guys have a great rest of your week. And if you want to hang out backstage, if you've got to go, I get it. Joe, it's getting late. You probably got to work early. But if you guys are able to hang out backstage, we can chat a little bit. I'll land this plane and we'll move on. Well, again, another Monday night. I thought it was interesting. I really appreciated the points and the viewpoints and the positions that the guests brought to the panel. I thought it was informative, intriguing, and I think a lot of people appreciated it. So thank you so much for choosing Pine Island Research on another Monday night. And we will see you guys next week. Until then, stay safe, enjoy the spring weather, and we will see you guys later.